The Stronghold, An Unexpected Hero by Elyses. It was borderline chaos at the Stronghold. People were dying. More than usual. People aren't dying irregularly due to anything behind the walls of the Stronghold or anything. It seems like the environment is getting more deadly. More deadly than it has been? How? Some people think it's something in the air, like whatever it is that makes it feel heavier than before the evolution event. The evolution event was what some scientists were calling the initial event of the first mutation wave from just zombie to mutant killing machines. To them, it was amazing. These things that everyone thought were dead were actually undergoing rapid evolution. But evolution in a large creature is something that was thought to be reserved for the living. It just didn't make any sense. Whatever caused the zombie outbreak and the evolution event were obviously connected, but now despite the experience we've all gained dealing with these creatures, people are dying out there at an alarming rate. Our previous 3 loot runs had been disastrous. A team of 3 amateur runners missed their checkpoint clock-in and every last one of their radio checks. When they didn't return, we sent out another team of 3, but this time they were our regulars. Tank, Ian, and Ada should have easily been able to locate our missing team and secure the area. They should have been able to retrieve all the resources looted by our lost team and had time to finish what they had set out to do. 48 hours and it was still radio silence from our regulars. People at the Stronghold were becoming fearful of what would be inevitable if we didn't secure those supplies for the community. Our final hope, it seemed, would be to send out an elite squad. Palmer was a stealth expert. She was able to sneak up even on the sucker things. And with the combination of Alonzo's decoy specialty, coupled with his extreme athleticism, the pair should have been fine alone on this mission. Alonzo was track and field All-American, and even tried out for the Olympics. Even though he didn't make it, he was still easily one of the most athletic members of our society here. They were backed up by Gunner, who, as you can guess, sports the big guns. Gunner was a true gunner in the sense that his comfort zone was a few bags of sand, a tripod, and any light machine gun you had lying around with plenty of ammo. Ronan was the last of the squad. He was an expert marksman. He could hit a postage stamp from over 5,000 meters away. I mean, he was a freak of nature. Figuratively speaking, and probably in bad taste since their squad was completely wiped out. This was looking worse and worse for the Stronghold. The reason these risks were being taken was because 70% of our batteries were fried. There was a severe thunderstorm that overloaded every battery that was connected to our grid. We are now reduced to running all of our 30% backup batteries at once to keep vital systems running. Most people were complacent with the idea, but these people didn't design our power grid. It was what we can call significantly less than state-of-the-art. Regardless of the situation, the grid was never meant to be powered partially. And the 30% backup batteries were meant to cycle out fried batteries in single, maybe double outages. Never were we supposed to rely on the full 30% unless we still had at least 30% of our primary batteries. Even though this was a problem, the majority of our engineers are puzzled since the lightning rod isn't attached to any of our electronic infrastructure. This fact started a quiet investigation that very little people knew about. Without power, our computers go down. And that means that our entire society here at the Stronghold could be put at risk. You might think that once the zombies started coming and the power went out that everyone would abandon their computers and smartphones. That did happen, but for some of the more future-minded groups who stockpiled electronics, they all paved the way for what we are able to incubate: civilization. Outside the walls of the Stronghold, it is truly the wild, and everything outside the walls will destroy civilization. It is our responsibility to protect civilization, and one day rise it to a power at which we can once again claim the world. But maybe with some lessons learned. Hell, most people don't give a rat's ass about that. They just want to take back what's ours. Computers allow us to organize everything from day-to-day jobs and responsibilities to allocation of food, supplies, and millions of terabytes of records of various professional information. If these computers go down, we lose the ability to teach future generations the skills cannibalized from a world before the evolution event. To give an idea of the amount and context of that educational information, every doctor, biologist, engineer, lawyer, or anyone who has a degree, all those that seek refuge in the Stronghold go through a 6-month screening process in which will include them spending hours a day typing everything they know about their profession. This never stops though. Every job done from surgery to reprogramming computers, everything is documented by the task performer and saved to the Stronghold's brain, which is really just a 1,500 square foot room filled with hard drives, USBs, CDs, and even floppy disks. We will have time to delve into the inner workings of the Stronghold if we can manage to recover those supplies. Otherwise, none of this shit matters anyway. Most of us here just want to choose a different site. We always have multiple options when it comes to looting batteries and electronics. To the majority of the society, it was enraging to see the Deciders continuously sending more of our men and women into a waiting onslaught. We rallied and petitioned for days to change the site, and their only response was that too much of the Stronghold's resources have been invested into the current loot site, that it would be more costly to abandon our retrieval efforts than to continue pursuing and face more potential loss of life. Costly? How fucked up is that? They want to put a cost on someone's life. Tensions being so high, it could only be a matter of time before a revolt or something happened and the Stronghold tears itself apart from the inside. The Deciders are definitely not telling us everything when it comes to the reasons they keep going after this site. Alonzo leads his squad to the site and begins searching one of the vehicles left behind by a previous team. He begins reloading his weapons and stacks up on supplies. While he was getting his equipment in order, Palmer sneaked up behind a stumbling zombie and rammed her hunting knife into the base of its skull. It fell to the ground as she backed away as silent as she showed up, putting her knife through the skull of another zombie that was crawling towards Alonzo. She moved like an angel of death, swiftly bringing grace to the one she called the suffering. Everyone has their own philosophical construct on what or why these creatures exist, or they do not have one, and they just want to beat it. Palmer, though, she really believed that what she was doing was ending the zombie suffering. I didn't think it would be like the movies where there would be people that actually didn't look at zombies as zombies but called them something else, and all those names exist in the world today. She retreats slowly to cover Alonzo, but before she could close the distance, a slug thing burrows its way out of the ground in between the two of them. With both their backs turned and the creature between them, Alonzo hears a weird inhaling noise. He instantly knows what this is. He swings around and fires his pistol at the slug thing. He was by no means a marksman, and swinging around drastically affected his accuracy. He hit the slug thing in seemingly a non-vital area since it immediately let out its lung-rattling roar. For some reason, everyone's ammo was depleted and only Alonzo had a loaded gun. What had happened along the way to the site that caused the teams to expend all their ammunition before coming to a stop? What had they encountered? Everything in the area heard the slug roar and began descending upon the ill-equipped team's location. Alonzo throws a Molotov into a horde of zombies approaching their supply site. 7 of those walking corpses begin to burn, continuing to walk until their tendons snap due to hyperdehydration from exposure to the fire. Alonzo pulls out a small submachine gun and begins laying fire into the remaining zombies. Suddenly another slug tried to roar, but just as it lets out, Palmer quickly executes it. In the same moment, a third one inside the barn roared, and it nearly knocked her off her feet. Gunnar was outside the barn, using his machete to hack a single zombie nearly to pieces. Gunnar was in a frenzy. The zombie had nearly bitten him in the neck from behind and sent him into a blind panic. 2 more zombies get taken out by his fury, in his desperate attempt to overfight a situation that required a much smaller energy pool to overcome. Palmer was too close, and still trying to recover from that slug nearly breaking her eardrums. She was just too close to the other remaining slug that had burrowed its way back into the dirt beneath the barn, all the while spraying a fountain of its toxic excrement. Some of this excrement got on her forearm and it began burning through. She panicked to remove her armor and saw that it had reached her flesh. She quickly cut the chunk of contaminated flesh from her arm, threw it to the ground, and raced for the ladder in the barn. Safely in the loft space of the barn, she feels more of the excrement still burning through her arm, and takes the point of her blade and begins stabbing and picking it out of the wound on her arm, and pouring water on it. She was losing a lot of blood quickly. Ronan hastily tended to Palmer's wounds in the barn while Alonzo and Gunnar hacked away at the remaining zombies underneath the loft space. With the area moderately safe, so to speak, the team began to loot the entire barn of what was left behind by the previous team. Alonzo finds an M9 in the barn and holsters it. He then grabs the ammo and puts it in his pouch. From there, Gunnar and Alonzo carried several car batteries back to the truck along with some medical supplies and additional weapons. With Palmer back on her feet, feeling the effects of the painkillers, They then headed to the next vehicle down the road where one of the other teams had stashed a lot of equipment. This site was only a few blocks away, so to save fuel and keep the noise down, they decided to move forward on foot. Alonzo spots the vehicle packed with supplies, but as he begins to search the area for points to secure the site, a sucker comes flying around the fence he was crouched next to. They had been sneaking east along the north fence line of the warehouse that needed to be looted, silently killing a few zombies as they approached the eastern edge. The sucker violently attacks Alonzo and brings him to the floor. Another zombie bites him in the hand while the sucker leaps with its mouth wide, going straight for his face, but Palmer and Ronan both swing their weapons and connect. Palmer strikes its head, and Ronan strikes what would be its kidney if it were human. It squirms around on the ground before quickly hopping to its feet, almost like something out of an exorcism movie. It poises to attack, but Palmer swings and connects with its skull. It shakes it off, bounces, and pounces forward, landing an arm bone deep into Palmer's hip. She was limping at this point. The wound was too severe. Alonzo had made it over the fence to see if he could find any explosives in the vehicle out front, but in doing so, he alerted a slug thing on the other side of the east fence, and it roared, calling a massive horde with a fat boy to his position. The fat boy burst through, breaking the east fence to pieces, knocking Alonzo from his feet. He was able to quickly recover his footing, running from the fat boy and a horde of about 20 zombies. There's two of those slug things about 20 meters from Alonzo, just blaring away, bringing more zombies to their location. Ronan tries to run around the horde in the opposite direction, while Palmer hops over the north fence in a desperate attempt to evade the sucker that is relentlessly chasing her down. Ronan didn't realize it until it was too late. He'd run directly into the two slugs as they roared once again, toppling him over. 3 zombies latch onto him while he's down, and each bite huge chunks of flesh from his body. One bites his calf muscle, another bites his right bicep, and a final one clamps down on his cheek, ripping a hole that allowed you to see all the way to his teeth. Soon there were at least 12 zombies trying or successfully taking bites out of his body, but he fought and got back to his feet. He jumped through the horde, landing on a zombie. Using his elbows, he crushed its skull with help from the momentum of the maneuver. He hopped to his feet and limps around the fence on the south side of the building. As Palmer follows close behind him, she realizes that Ronan is in serious trouble. Herself suffering a debilitating wound in consideration, she turns around to get the attention of the horde that was already closing in on them. Ronan continues to limp away, trying to find somewhere to quickly tend to his most severe wounds. As Ronan approaches the end of the southern fence, Alonzo jumps over with a sucker in hot pursuit. It chases Alonzo back down the southern fence line to the east, where he ran into the horde Palmer was dealing with. The sucker seemed to change focus to Palmer, but the fat boy sees that Ronan is injured and charges. Both Alonzo and Palmer see this and react instinctively. Palmer runs the opposite direction to draw the sucker and the bulk of the horde away from Ronan. Alonzo charges the fat boy from the rear. As Ronan clears around the southwestern corner of the fence, 556 starts blasting from the north side of the west fence of the warehouse. It was Gunner. He'd been off somewhere looking for a gun, and he'd found one. Chunks of the fat boy's head began flying into the air as Gunner's bullets hit their mark. Palmer, now on the southeast side of the fence, not so gracefully dodging the sucker and the 30-some zombies chasing her, she gets hit in the head hard by the sucker's broken arm bone, and it was lights out. But she manages to regain consciousness just in time to get to her knee and pull out her pistol. The sucker's arm bone went through her eye and out her cerebral cortex. She died instantly and suffered from her wounds no more. 3 more slug things somewhere just keep on screaming. One burrows its way from the east fence all the way to the northwestern corner of the fence where Gunner was shooting from. The slug roared as it dug its way over, seemingly signaling to the other 2 slugs to follow suit. They dig around the base of Gunner's feet, and the loose ground caused him to lose his footing and fall onto his back. At this moment, all 3 slugs must have felt the vibration or heard him, because they all roared as they sprayed their excrement onto him from 3 sides, forming a triangle. As his face and body began to burn and bubble away, the slugs, along with thousands of smaller slug things the size of mice, began to feed on the Gunner goo. The fat boy turned his attention from Ronan to Alonzo, but Ronan, not knowing this, now panicking and losing more and more blood with every step, runs towards the warehouse door as he looks behind him to see nothing chasing him. The side of his head slams into a metal rod sticking out of the structure of the warehouse. This, however, doesn't kill him instantly. For 23 grueling minutes, He twitches and squirms, trying to free himself while the sucker uses his body as a punching bag, leaving gaping puncture wounds with every blow. And before long, the zombies begin to eat him while he's alive. Alonzo sees this and freezes for a moment. Bam! The fat boy slams its huge hand into Alonzo's ribcage. Curled over in pain, he grabs onto the fat boy's leg as tightly as he could and began using his knife to cut out the fat boy's kneecap. The fat boy collapses and crushes Alonzo's left arm. He drags himself behind the zombies, eating Ronan alive, and makes himself to the supply vehicle. Alonzo climbs in and closes the door. Bang! The zombie falls down with its head partially ripped off from the volley of bullets from the two men. "Look, it has a body cam. It must be one of ours," says a man to his partner. "Run it back. I want to see what happened here. We need to be prepared for anything," the man's voice blares from the body cam playback. The man turns off the body cam and tosses it into the supply vehicle. He drags the zombie out of the car and speaks. "That's Alonzo. Looks like he locked himself in the truck and died of his wounds." He looked back at his partner. "Hey Z, check out what's on Alonzo's." Z cuts him off. "Yeah, I see it. Did you think I didn't see it the moment you opened the door?" Z reaches over and pulls out the M9 from the holster on Alonzo's corpse. He holsters the gun and they continue to loot the warehouse. One by one, they find each of their fallen comrades' bodies and take their supplies. No time to bury them. The hordes are closing in on the noise from their vehicles when they drove in. The two men drove in loud and emptied every gun they had left into the horde of zombies that awaited them at the site. They run over to the stuffed vehicle and quickly grab more ammo and guns that weren't on the verge of breaking. Z watches the man's back while he looks for more usable supplies. Then the man cues Z over to equip himself while the man goes on lookout. After Z had equipped himself, they both sneak around the barn and see that there are 3 of those loud slugs. The man says, 3 magnaphyllum in the barn. Let's take them out. The man fires 3 short controlled bursts with the Uzi he found in the vehicle. All 3 of the magnaphyllum were killed. Some people higher up or affiliated with higher up the chain of deciders often refer to the creatures as their scientifically known name, but most people in the world were killed before they had a chance to even care about what they should be called. So with that fact, most people call it how they see it, and others do in their own way as well. Magnaphyllum is just simply Latin for loud invertebrate, so the scientists of the apocalyptic time are also just calling it how they see it, just in a different language. "Oh shoot," snaps Z. "I didn't even load my gun," as he begins to load it. "Don't worry, I've already killed them," the man reassures his friend. At that moment, the static horde that had been lying in the darkness of the barn began to emerge at the sound of gunfire. At least 8 were upon the man and Z. Both of them skillfully weave through the near mindless corpses. The man tosses a Molotov, catching them all on fire, and they slow down gradually as they burn while chasing the man and Z. The gunfire draws in another horde of about 12 zombies, and one of those creatures with the flowers. The man and Z know that these aren't actually flowers, but they do resemble flowers. But they strike more of a resemblance when compared to mushrooms, especially considering the spores it produces. Most people were still going to call them flowers no matter what you told them, but the man and Z habitually identified everything about the zombie apocalypse from the scientific perspective. They both lead the horde away from the barn and open fire on the one with the mushrooms growing all over it. "Hominis fungum down," the man yells out, turning back around, continuing to run from the horde. Hominis fungum is Latin for human mushroom, and that's the technical name for the mutants with flowers and mushrooms on them. Both men run in a straight line with one another until they split off in different directions at the same time, pulling with them about an equal portion of the horde in which both of them open fire to take them all out. Even though they killed them, more were coming. On the other side of the barn, a loud slug, or magnaphyllum, roars, drawing even more zombies and 3 more mushroom carriers. They spread out in the open field to deal with the threat easier and slowly grind the numbers of the zombies down until there are only a few crawlers left. The man swings his baseball bat at a zombie that launched itself directly at him and shoots its head instantly. The ground began to shake and a loud roar from behind the man bellowed. The man knew this wasn't the roar from a magnaphyllum. This was a gargantuan. "Look out, Z!" the man yells as he sprints away from the fat boy chasing him. You guessed it, fat boys have a name as well. They're simply referred to as gargantuan, obviously attributed to their enormous size. Z tells the man to make a run for it and find something to take care of the gargantuan while he swoops in and fires 4 shots at the gargantuan's face, he immediately, almost as if enraged, charges Z. Z was a sure shot with the M9. It would be hard to catch him without it. There's a joke that he might even shower with it. Hell, in this world it wouldn't be outrageous to shower, shit, and shave with a gun nearby. He runs from the gargantuan and shoots a mushroom carrier several times, shattering its leg bones. It falls to the ground and produces a large cloud of mutant spore. Z is able to catch up with the man and put some significant distance between himself, the horde, and the gargantuan. The man instructs Z to come hide on the other side of the barn, which was facing east. He asks Z to cover him while he searched through his equipment to find a better weapon than his Uzi. He pulls out a .357 Magnum and says, "This'll do." Loads it and fires 3 shots, killing a zombie sprinting towards them both, as another one tries to grab him from behind. He quickly dodges, grabbing the zombie, throwing it to the ground, and stomping on its head until it stops moving. They managed to confuse the horde that was chasing them and ensure that the entire building had been looted and no valuable supplies had been left behind. When they were ready to go, the gargantuan from earlier wandered back over to the barn and stepped right into Z's path. He points his M9 with confidence and squeezes the trigger. Fuck, it's jammed. And at that moment, the gargantuan swung its huge arm at Z, and as he backed out of the way, the creature's hand connected with Z's M9 and it went flying, only to land into a mess of bloody mud at the opening of the barn. He hurried as fast as he could to grab it, but there was no time. The gargantuan rushed him and his foot pressed down on his gun, pushing it deeper into the bloody mud. He has no choice but to use the Ruger. His .22s barely phased the gargantuan, and Z runs while firing back at his face. He runs to the vehicle, hoping to get his hands on a better gun or find more ammo. He does in fact grab more ammo, but there are no working guns. The only guns in the car need to be serviced. Bam! The gargantuan swung his hand and practically lifted Z as he flew about 5 feet from the vehicle. He gets to his feet, hobbling in pain. He tries his hardest to get away. He reaches the minor safety of the barn and painfully pulls himself up the ladder and reaches the loft area where he falls flat on his back, gasping for air. The man sprints into the barn after seeing his friend hit hard. He gives Z some painkillers and an amp tab, and after 30 minutes of waiting for the painkillers to kick in, Z was feeling well enough again to continue forward. The man asks Z where his M9 was, and Z just shot him a dreadful look. The gargantuan and the horde were still out there waiting. All the commotion from earlier had drawn the horde back onto their position. As soon as the man set foot off the ladder, a sucker pounced onto him, taking him to the ground. Z jumps to skip the last 3 steps on the ladder and lands his knees in the sucker's back, and it leaps from the man and onto an empty toolbox. Z charges the toolbox and knocks the sucker onto the ground. He then slams the toolbox down onto the sucker's body, but he knows it isn't dead. He sprints out of the barn, reloading his gun while the sucker scrambles from under the toolbox. The sucker is on his heels in no time, so Z tries to jump a few fences to maybe slow down the sucker, and it seems to work well enough to allow him to get a few shots off. He kills a few zombies, but the sucker is still after him. He runs back into the barn, but when he runs out of the other doorway, a gargantuan comes charging from around the building, causing Z to change his course or be crushed. He runs over to the man, who sees he's attracted the attention of the sucker that had been on his own heels a few moments ago. The man goes down as the sucker thrusts its broken arm bone at his skull. The arm bone only grazes him, but it struck hard enough to knock him out for 8 seconds, while Z had to fight off the sucker and the horde that were swarming the man's body. Z swings his bat and smashes the zombie's skull as it was jumping onto the man's body, splashing brains and blood all over his face, snapping him awake. The man wipes his face and eyes as he gets back to his feet and just starts swinging at everything. Z ducks and evades a wild swing from the man as he regained his composure. The man sprinted as well as he could while still significantly dazed. The gargantuan managed to find him again and charged him. The man didn't have the energy to evade the collision, so he had to adjust his pursuit angle and go wide back to the barn instead of a straight shot. He stops by the vehicle to reload his ammo stash and sprints away from it, trying to put more ground between himself and the horde. Z distracted the horde to an area where he was able to quietly slip away between the trees outside the barn and regroup with the man. The man approaches the second vehicle to the east of the warehouse, while Z runs frantically for his life since he thought he'd gotten rid of the sucker, but it was hunting him. He was at the warehouse door and the sucker tackles him to the ground. It swings its jagged arm bones at Z's face, but he blocked most of the force with his bat as it made a high-pitched cracking sound upon impact. He gets up and swings his bat at the sucker's face. It falls to the ground, so he kicks it in the face as hard as he could. Knocking the sucker unconscious, he then jams his knife in and out of his skull until it stopped moving. 3 Magnophyllum, or loud slug creatures, let out a deafening roar, and hundreds of zombies began flocking to their position. They went through hell to secure the warehouse. Luckily, neither of them suffered any life-threatening injuries. While looting the warehouse, the man hears something in the driver's seat of the truck he was looting. He opens the door. The zombie falls down with its head partially ripped off from the volley of bullets from the two men. "Look, it has a body cam. It must be one of ours," says the man to his partner Z. "Run it back. I want to see what happened here. We need to be prepared for anything." The man's voice blares from the body cam playback. Z gets Alonzo's M9 and they finish looting the warehouse. They thought they were done when a loose brick in the wall fell. Through the hole in the wall, the man saw something shiny. He took more bricks down and began tearing the wall apart, creating a hole large enough to step through. It looked like medical equipment and vials for testing sciencey stuff. The man walks over to the end of the room, pointing his flashlight at a body sitting in the chair. The person's head was blown clean off, with a shotgun lying next to its feet. He had a badge on his shirt. The organization was blacked out, but his name was Dr. Jace Carter. It looked like he was staring at this chalkboard when he killed himself. The chalkboard looked like it had a lot of figures previously written on it, and the writing was poorly erased. The only intelligible writing left on the board was the word "us," written in big letters. Z joins the man near the chalkboard. The man looks down at the body and notices it's clenching something in its left hand. He pulls it out and unfolds a dirty, sticky note that said, "Boletus Immortalum," and nothing more. He takes the badge and the piece of paper and puts them in his pocket. He then turns and takes an image with his body cam of the chalkboard, then finally uses his body cam to document the scene, how it was found. Both of the men completely stuffed all 8 vehicles with the vital resources this site had to offer. When they look over everything, nothing really seems all that special. The only thing out of the ordinary was this suicide and short note, but that was more eerie than anything else at most. "That was the last thing he ever wanted to hold," says the man. "That's something to think about for deathbed goals. Something to hold for my soul. Or something. Man, I don't know." Z reached into his pocket, pulled out a photo, and looks down at a house on a sunny day. He smiled and turned it over to read the word "hope" written on the back. He puts the photo back into his pocket and continues to prepare for their journey back. They needed to make as few runs back to the Stronghold as possible to minimize any threats, so they hitched 3 vehicles to each of their own trucks. The drive back was slow and dangerous. With most of the vehicles they were hauling on flat tires, they were burning through so much fuel that by the time they were halfway home, they'd already used 10% of the fuel that was in their loot yield. Out of the trees come the 2 men, both masked, as is policy when entering the trap at the Stronghold. The trap is basically a concrete room that you might drive or walk into while masked. Once inside, the door behind you closes and it's pitch black. A blue light comes on and you're ordered to take off your mask. Several cameras run facial recognition, body structure recognition, and other biosecurity measures to ensure everyone's identity. A red light then blinks with the words that say, "Press under," as a small button also blinks. Pressing the button will cause the needle to rapidly prick your finger, extracting blood for genetic clearance. Once cleared of any mutations via mandatory blood test, the door ahead opens and the C-130 bay doors drop, opening for the men to enter. If you are found to be an enemy to the Stronghold, robotic-controlled M16s are mounted in every corner of the ceiling, waiting to rip you to shreds. When they hop out of their vehicles, at least 200 people show up to greet them. They were cheering them on like they had saved the world. This was, in fact, partially due to the loot yield that they were able to haul back. Yes, this was an incredible win after so many devastating losses, and we have more than enough batteries to repair our grid. That was all great, but the 200 people that came down to greet the man and Z, people murmur in disbelief. "It's Brian. It's Brian Menard. It's Zuru. It's Zuru. Hey, it's Z." Anybody could have come back from that run with the same load. But this event sent a message. Because of Brian and Zuru's actions, there will be no revolt in the Stronghold. There will be celebrations with food and wine. Brian is one of the deciders at the Stronghold, and that's why so many people were gathered to greet the 2 heroes. Back before the apocalypse, there were politicians, but today we just have deciders. There's no democracy, although certain things may come to a vote under certain circumstances, such as crime or job selection. Brian was greeted with open arms by his fellow deciders, Zora and Derica. They escort him to a private room to be debriefed, and Zuru is taken to another room but released after only a few questions, in collection of his body cam. Zuru isn't a decider, and he never wanted to be in charge of anyone but his own actions. but unfortunately his relationship with Brian gives him more power than he ever asked for. He's known Brian since they were kids, and they just grew up interested in different things, but always remained best friends throughout their personal journeys. Zuru loves computers, and Brian is one of those people that just loves to do the right thing. So naturally, Zuru became one of the programmers for the Stronghold, and is responsible for all the automated defense systems that protect our home. Brian, on the other hand, saw so many people in power abusing it and wasting the Stronghold's resources on power trips, so he signed up for the Stronghold militia to work his way up the ranks, determined to be deemed worthy of becoming a decider, in which he would then have to undergo a new type of rigorous, stressful training to qualify. Upon achieving his goal, he vowed to always do the right thing with any amount of power he was to ever acquire. Brian is ushered into a room where 7 of the 9 deciders have gathered. One of the deciders is required to be a doctor in case someone is in need of medical treatment during their debriefings. The current doctor to the deciders is Jacob Collins. He was kind of quirky and had an odd likability about him. He always wore this baseball cap with his initials written on the front. It was really his whole name, but it was so faded that only the JC was visible. His son had made him that hat before a sucker had gotten a hold of him and drug him away. Brian allows the doors to close before he calls over his radio. "Drasco, I made it back. What have you got for me?" Drasco radios back. "We are green," he says plainly. "Come find me when you get out of the wolf's den." Brian then storms over to the table where the deciders are seated. He slams the badge and the paper with the words Bolitas Immortalum written on it, along with the body cam footage. "What does it mean, Baker?" Baker looks calmly back at Brian. Baker blinks his eyes in a fluttering fashion and replies, "How on earth am I supposed to know?" "This was your shit show. You're the one who insisted this site was so important," yells Brian, clearly enraged with his colleague. "Who the fuck is Jace Carter, and what is Bolitas Immortalum? Explain it." At that moment, Jacob drops the atraumatic needle he had been using to stitch a wound on Brian's arm. He looked at the badge, then the paper with the writing. He spins around and looks at the footage of Brian's body cam. As he almost passes out, Derica quickly reaches out to offer support. He grabs her hand and pushes himself away towards the exit and stumbles out the door. Baker stands up and says, "It is decided that this debriefing is adjourned." "This isn't over, Baker," Brian yells. "You can't just risk people's life like this. We were on the verge of a revolt. And your actions today with your friend, Zuru, just solved all our problems in that department." Baker chuckles and pushes his chair in. "Oh, how the people are in love with their deciders now. That we, their deciders, are willing to put our lives on the line for them." He lets out a narcissistic laugh and exits the room. Zora looks at Brian, sympathetic to his point of view. Brian walks out of the debrief room where the hallway was filled with hundreds of people waiting to shake his hand and see his always smiling face. Wine was placed in his hand as he began walking down the hall to listen in on Zuru telling the people about Brian's heroic actions out on the run. As Zuru continues, Brian slips out of view in search for Drasco.